There are essentially three ways to approach running a scene as a GM. You can go theater of the mind, which relies completely on imagination and has virtually no limits. Well, the limit here is that your internal visual reference library needs to at least somewhat match those of the players. This is why media touchstones are so important and why genre RPGs are so popular. Theater of the Mind also has the advantage of requiring zero visual aid prep on the part of the GM. On the completely opposite side of the spectrum is the gridded map approach, and this has naturally been around since the beginning of the hobby, since D&D was born of a war game that relied on specific distances and movement rates. Prepping a gridded map can run the gamut from simple to utterly harrowing. In a real-life tabletop, the simulationist approach can include literally endless amounts of physical terrain and carefully painted minis for the characters and enemies. If you're being simulationist in a VTT, it could include dynamic lighting, special effects, and token statuses. But there's a middle ground here, one that's a lot closer to the no prep side of the spectrum actually, which emphasizes storytelling a bit more than tactical play, and that's the static or looping scene image. This is a single image that you show to players during a scene, just to visually put them in the scene. I guess if you're playing a game that uses zones in combat, you could break up the images into zones, but even that's more than what I'm talking about here. This approach I'm referring to is just an image that keeps players' imaginations informed at the barest level, while still allowing them to imagine any kind of scene they want within that baseline visual context. One of the most notable VTTs that has come out recently, which emphasizes this approach, is Alchemy. You can use gridded maps in Alchemy, but it launched as a sort of scaled back approach to running scenes, where you just sort of pop in an image for a scene and call it a day. Which is all to say, in this video I wanted to showcase the work of James's RPG art, an artist who has been specifically making scene images for RPGs for several years now. He primarily makes a living on Patreon, where he has available dozens, hundreds of looping scene images at this point. I'm pretty sure the first question you have is if James's work is AI generated. It was actually the first question I asked him. He showed me some work progression proof and says that it takes him up to a week to make a scene. He also mentioned in an interview that when he started, it used to take him up to a month to make a scene. James attended film school and worked on small budget movies in Australia before moving to Vancouver, where he worked in the visual effects industry there. Eventually, he discovered a D&D group there and started making scene images for Curse of Strahd because the 5e book didn't include any scene illustrations. Eventually, he started making scenes for a bunch of other official 5e adventure modules and launched a Patreon since he was so passionate about making these images. He says one significant influence on him is Jacob Rosowski, an artist whose concepts have been the basis for board games like Scythe and Iron Harvest. As far as advice for other artists who want to maybe make a living out of it, James has a few points. Create for yourself. Don't obsess over likes or comparing your work to others. Enjoy your authenticity. Just find what makes your work different from others and celebrate it. Embrace it. Surround yourself with supportive people. And don't rely too much on external direction. James says that his goals for the near future include making more generic fantasy scenes that aren't tied to specific campaigns, and to eventually start creating sci-fi scenes. So yeah, that's James's RPG art. I've left links down below to his Patreon and his website. I really like the scene image approach to running a scene. I don't think it could work for every game, since some of those really emphasize tactical combat, but even in those games, there are going to be social encounters and other scenes that don't require a grid, and you could easily throw in an image like the ones that James makes in order to tie everything together visually. I'd love to know your favorite approach to running a scene. Leave your comments down below. Thanks for watching. See ya.